The Department of Justice just told the world it released 3 million pages of Jeffrey Epstein's files. Dan sounds like a lot, right? Here's what they didn't put in the press release. They collected 6 million pages. Blonde. That means exactly half of everything investigators gathered on Jeffrey Epstein is still locked away. Right now. Today, and it's not just missing pages, it's missing text messages, missing prison footage, missing emails, and redactions that don't add up, where a victim's full name is left exposed, but a powerful man's face gets blacked out of a photo that was already public online. Plummeter. So today we're going through exactly what CBS News, NPR, and Congress's own watchdog agency found when they went looking for what's not in the Epstein files, and why lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are now asking questions. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why even the lawmakers who wrote this law are saying the Justice Department fell short of it. Let's rewind for 30 seconds, because context matters here. In November 2025, after years of public pressure, Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. It passed the House 427-1. The Senate passed it unanimously. President Trump signed. The law had one job: force the Justice Department to release everything related to Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, with only narrow exceptions to protect victims. The deadline was December 19, 2025. The DOJ missed it. They didn't release the bulk of the files until January 30, 2026, over a month late. When they finally did, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche stood up and announced it himself. Over 3 million pages, more than 2,000 videos, around 180,000 images. He called it the final, complete release, but almost immediately, the math stopped adding up. Here's the number that started everything. Federal investigators had told Congress, on the record, that they identified roughly 6 million pages of material as potentially relevant to the Epstein and Maxwell cases. The DOJ released about half of that. When CBS News pressed the department on this exact discrepancy, the official response was that the unreleased pages were duplicates, unrelated material, or protected by legal privilege. Democratic Representative Ro Khanna, one of the two lawmakers who actually wrote this law, disputed that explanation directly. He and other members of Congress have accused the DOJ of withholding specific categories of material, including FBI victim interview statements known as 302s, a draft indictment and prosecution memo from the original 2007 Florida investigation, and hundreds of thousands of emails and files pulled from Epstein's own computers. So you have the law's own authors saying this isn't compliance, this is a workaround. This is where the discrepancies get specific. The law is clear about what can be redacted. Information that protects victims. It explicitly says you're not allowed to redact something just because it's politically sensitive or embarrassing to someone powerful. But CBS News' investigation found case after case where that line got crossed. Example 1, there's a text exchange between Epstein and former Trump advisor Steve Bannon. In it, Epstein sends a link to a news article. The photo attached to that article, a publicly available, already published photo, has one face obscured. Not a victim. A public figure's face, obscured in an image that was already visible online for anyone to find. And example touring. Example 2, a 2002 email signed simply, Love, Melania. The sender's and recipient's full names and email addresses were redacted. Now, the First Lady has since publicly acknowledged she exchanged emails with Ghislaine Maxwell, calling it casual correspondence. But the redaction itself raises the question, why hide an exchange that's later going to be acknowledged anyway? When CBS reached out to the DOJ specifically asking about these redactions, the Bannon photo and 2 of the emails, they were quietly unredacted. No announcement, no correction notice, they just changed. You know? And here's the part that should bother you, regardless of who you voted for. NPR's independent review found the opposite problem happening at the same time. Names of sexual abuse victims, people who were never supposed to be exposed, were left fully visible in multiple documents. Some had never even been publicly named before. So, in the same release, on the same day, some public figures' identifying details were obscured in already public images, while in other cases, names that should have stayed protected were left visible. Lalian, one survivor, Annie Farmer, who testified against both Epstein and Maxwell in court, told NPR directly, "There's just no explanation for how it could have been done so poorly. I don't think this is just about rushing to get this information out." You know? Beyond the redactions, CBS's investigation flagged entire categories of material that appear to be missing outright. Oh. Most of Epstein's emails from his older accounts simply aren't in the released archive. Monda's email attachments are frequently missing. You'll see the email itself, but whatever was attached to it never made it into the files. West, there is no record of any Signal communications, despite Signal, being a known method Epstein and his associates used to communicate. Massage scheduling records stop appearing after 2009, even though Epstein's documented activity is known to have continued well beyond that date. Monda Prisen's surveillance footage from the period around his death is absent. Records from the DEA's investigation into Epstein are missing. And structurally, this is important. The law only applies to Department of Justice records. That means anything held by the Treasury Department, ICE, or the CIA was never legally required to be turned over at all. If Epstein's network had any financial trail through Treasury, any immigration paper trail through ICE, or touched anything intelligence related through the CIA, none of that is covered by this entire transparency law. Not because it doesn't exist, because Congress only pointed the law at one building. This is where it stops being a media story and becomes a formal government investigation. In March 2026, a bipartisan group of senators, Democrats Dick Durbin, Ben Ray Lujan, and Jeff Merkley, alongside Republican Lisa Murkowski, sent a letter to the Government Accountability Office. That's the GAO, Congress's own independent nonpartisan watchdog. Their request wasn't subtle. They asked the GAO to investigate whether the DOJ's redaction and release process effectively let key material slip through review unaddressed, and whether that failure re-exposed victims to harm. Bold. That's a serious question, coming directly from sitting U.S. senators. The GAO confirmed it received the request and is reviewing it. This came 1 week after the House Oversight Committee voted to subpoena then Attorney General Pam Bondi over her handling of the files. And separately, there was another controversy layered on top of this. Lawmakers discovered the DOJ was logging which unredacted files members of Congress searched for when reviewing the material. Representative Jamie Raskin called it an outrageous abuse of power. Even the Republican House Speaker called the practice inappropriate. So at this point, you've got missing pages, inconsistent redactions, and Congress accusing the Justice Department of monitoring its own oversight process. As of this week, here's the state of play. The DOJ's official position, given directly to CBS News, is this: we have released every document required by the Epstein Files Transparency Act. They maintain everything else was duplicate, irrelevant, or privileged. Survivors' advocates, congressional Democrats, and now the GAO itself are not accepting that explanation at face value. Epstein survivors have continued pushing for action. In mid-June, a group of them met privately with House Oversight Chair James Comer specifically to push for further investigation into leads buried inside the files that have already been released. Banji. Meanwhile, journalists are still combing through the millions of pages that DID make it out, and they keep finding new threads, connections to the modeling industry, new names, new emails, suggesting that even within the files we do have, we haven't seen everything yet. Lamd, the DOJ has said its formal report to Congress will close out its obligations under the law entirely. Critics say that's exactly the problem. That complete is being declared by the same agency accused of leaving the most damaging material out. Yeah. So let's be clear about what we actually know. A law passed almost unanimously by Congress, a president who signed it, a department that says it complied, and a body of evidence compiled by news organizations, and now a federal watchdog, suggesting that compliance came with 3 million missing pages, inconsistent redactions, and entire categories of records that were never required to be searched in the first place. This isn't a closed story. The GAO investigation is still active, Congress is still pushing, and the files that ARE public are still being read, line by line, by reporters and survivors looking for what was left out. Land. If you want to actually go look at what's been released yourself, the DOJ's public file repository is linked in the description. Sip Lion, if this video helped you actually understand what's missing, and not just what made headlines, hit subscribe, because we're going to keep tracking this as the GAO investigation moves forward.